This is the Buffalo Trace Hard Hat Tour, part of a wider trip all around Kentucky where we looked at a range of distilleries and tours that you can find all on the channel.
All right, so got everybody. We're gonna head back this way. Just follow down that ramp.
Do we actually wear hard hats?
No. Cool. Hard hat tour, but no hard hats. Normally you'd get earplugs, but you don't even get those today because today is Labor Day and they're not actually running the cookers or the still, so shouldn't be too loud. All right, so how many of you guys have been here to Buffalo Trace before? Handful of you, okay. Know you guys from this morning. So to get started, I'm gonna introduce myself. My name is Alyssa. I've been a tour guide here at Buffalo Trace now for 3 years. Gonna be honest with you, didn't know a thing about bourbon before I started working here. I'm born and raised here in Kentucky. So you would think, as somebody from Kentucky, I would know a thing or two about bourbon. Didn't before I started working here. Also don't know a thing about horse racing, and that's the two things that Kentucky is known for, horse racing and bourbon. But going to school here, working here on the side, and yeah, 3 years now, I drink bourbon now. First day, they actually had us do a tasting, and I was sipping on it, and I was like, there's no way anybody drinks this for fun. But 3 years later, I have my own bourbon collection. I drink it now. It's all good. So this is the hard hat tour. So we're going to be walking through production areas. The biggest thing is no smoking, no dipping, no vaping. As we're walking around, obviously, we make alcohol here, alcohol fire. They don't mix well together. You guys can take any pictures, any videos that you want to take along the way. Otherwise, if you have questions, let me know. I'll do my best to answer them. I'm not a chemist in any way. But again, I've worked here for quite some time now. I've picked up on things, so I'll try my best to answer the questions that you guys have. But to get started, we're going to be walking through this process that you see here behind me. This is the distillation process. So we're starting at the very beginning on this tour, from grain receiving all the way down to that unaged whiskey that we put into the barrel. So before we do a deep dive into this, do you guys know the rules to bourbon? Because there are rules to bourbon. You may have heard the term that not all whiskey is bourbon, but all bourbon is whiskey. Whiskey is a big umbrella. It is alcohol derived from grain. That's a big umbrella. Bourbon falls under that umbrella, but there are specific rules you have to follow. For one, it has to be made here in the United States. Back in 1964, Congress declared it America's national spirit. So it has to be made in the US, but it does not have to be made here in Kentucky. However, we make 95% of all bourbon here in Kentucky. 100% of the good bourbon, to be clear. All right. So, next rule, the dominant grain. Dominant grain has to be corn. You have to have 51% corn in your bourbon recipe for it to be classified as bourbon. Another rule is that you can have no additives to your bourbon outside of water. As soon as you add any flavoring, any coloring, it becomes a whiskey. The next rule is a little bit technical, and we'll get into it a little bit later in the tour. But when we distill our product, we cannot distill it higher than 160 proof. To compare it to another product like vodka. Vodka, your goal is you're trying to make an odorless, a tasteless product. It is a neutral grain spirit. When you distill that product, you have to distill it at 190 proof. You are stripping the grains of its flavor at that high proof. With bourbon, you don't want that. You want to maintain the flavor of the grains, the sweetness of the corn, so no higher than 160 off the still. When it goes into a barrel, no higher than 125 proof. And then when it goes into a bottle, no lower than 80 proof going into that bottle. And then last rule is the new oak charred container that you have to age it in. So once you use a barrel, you cannot use it again. They say 50 to 75% of the flavor of your bourbon, 100% of the color, comes from the container. So it's very important. All right, so now we know the rules. Again, we're going to walk through this process today. We start with grain receiving to running them through the hammer mill to make it into a cornmeal consistency that we are then going to cook. We cook it. After we cook it, we ferment it. We ferment for 3 to 5 days. And then after that, we distill it. And that again is what's going to create that white dog, moonshine, distillate, unaged whiskey, whatever you want to call it. That's what we're going to proof down and put into the barrel to start aging. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. we're gonna head up the stairs here. We're gonna start kind of in the middle of the process. Again, hard hat tour, we're gonna talk a lot about production, but we're also gonna talk a lot about history as well, okay? All right, we're gonna head up here. So if you want to, you can take a step on up and take a look inside the fermenters. We'll come down a little bit too. So again, we're starting in the middle of the process here, but I like coming up here so that you guys can look at our new fermenters that we have. So if you guys don't know, Buffalo Trace, we are America's oldest continuously operating distillery. We've been distilling here on site since 1786. We have seen 3 big expansions here on site. The first one came along with Colonel E.H. Taylor. So we started off as Leestown Distillery. So back in the day, before Kentucky was even a commonwealth, Buffalo would follow along the Kentucky River, and the Kentucky River is on the backside of our distillery. At some point in the tour, we'll actually get to walk along the side of it. And they would follow along the river, and the buffalo would pass through the bends in the river where it would shallow out, and they would leave trails behind. Trails are also known as traces, and that's what early explorers used to guide their way. 2 brothers, Willis and Hancock Lee, they came out from Virginia to survey the land. They loved it here, they settled it here, and they settled at Leestown. And again, it started distilling here in 1786, but jump nearly 100 years later, 1869, and that's when Colonel E.H. Taylor comes into the picture. He buys that Leestown distillery for $6,000 and then expands on it $70,000 worth. That was our first big expansion. He tries to make it into a world-class distillery. He brings along column still, new copper fermenters, new warehouses. He expands on it and then runs into financial difficulty. So our next big name that came into the picture was George T. Stagg. He was out in St. Louis, Missouri. He knew of the Taylor product. He knew that it was a good quality product. So Stagg bailed Taylor out of his debt, and Stagg then became president of the distillery. Taylor became vice president. They worked together for some time, but they had differing ideals of where they wanted to take the company, so they split ways. Taylor moved on to a different distillery down the road out in Millville, Kentucky. He called it the old Taylor and Sons Distillery. It's now known today, though, as Castle and Key. And Stagg stayed here, kept us open, kept us going. Eventually, even after Stagg passed away, they renamed this distillery the George T. Stagg Distillery in 1904, which we stayed up until we rebranded Buffalo Trace Distillery in 1999. Now, our next big expansion came along when our next big name came along. His name was Albert Bacon Blanton. And yes, his middle name really was Bacon. He started working here when he was 16 years old. He worked his way up the company ladder until 1921. In 1921, he became president of the distillery. And that's a tough year to take over a distillery. You have the Prohibition. The 18th Amendment, it said that you couldn't make alcohol, you couldn't sell alcohol, you could not transport alcohol. So what do you do with an entire distillery when you can't do those 3 things? I think you said it. You make medicine. So medicinal whiskey, that's what we did to get us through the Prohibition. We were one out of a handful of distilleries to receive a permit to make medicinal whiskey during that time. We did that because Blanton partnered with a company out in New York called the Shinley Company. And then again, one out of a handful of distilleries got that permit. During that time, you could go to your doctor, your dentist, or even your veterinarian to receive a prescription of 1 pint, 100 proof whiskey every 10 days. Right? Kentucky had less than 2 million people in the state during that time. There were 6 million prescriptions written in the state of Kentucky alone through the Prohibition. So we stayed open, we stayed busy. And our second big expansion, they took us from a 14-building distillery to a 114-building distillery. So a lot of what you see on site has to do with their contributions. Now, what we're standing in, this used to be one of Blanton's, his buildings. It used to be an old bottling hall. It was built in the 40s, but in the early 2000s, we expanded onto our Legends bottling hall, which is a high-speed bottling hall. And this room was cleared out we needed room for new fermenters, so we used this space. But we are a National Historic Landmark. We can't tear down buildings and start from scratch. We have to work around that status. So this building, the roof used to be about where you're standing right now. They literally had to lift and suspend the roof of this building to fit in these new fermenters because they're a little over that 2-story mark. So we added on these in 2019. They hold 93,000 gallons each. Every vertical inch is holding 306 gallons. So we have these 12. We also have another 12 from Blanson's time here on property that we'll walk through later in the tour that hold 92,000 gallons each. And then just this past year, we added on another 8 fermenters that are outdoor fermenters. So we have a total of 32 fermenters that are just as big as these. And you guys notice when we walked up, I said that you could take a step up and look inside. So they're kind of towards the end of the process here already, but you still see it bubbling a little bit. That is from the yeast. So yeast is going to eat through the sugar. We start with sweet mash in these tanks, which is straight out of the cookers once we cool it down. That sweet mash, it has a lot of sugar in it, and that yeast is going to start eating through the sugar, and basically what it poops out is your alcohol and carbon dioxide. So that's that bubbling that you see inside there. All right, and that red oil that you see at the top, that is corn oil. Where the corn is being broken down for its sugar, all that oil is released and it goes towards the top. We're going to take a walk down here and we'll watch a short little video of our former master distiller narrating about the fermentation process. Now, I did say former. He didn't leave us. He is actually now Sazerac's master distiller. His name is Harlan Wheatley. So Mr. Harlan Wheatley, again, he received a promotion of being Sazerac's master distiller. Sazerac is our parent company. So they bought us back in 1992 and rebranded us Buffalo Trace Distillery in 1999. And they have moved us through a $1.2 billion expansion. That $1.2 billion expansion has allowed us to double production all around. And we'll get into that a little bit again as we go throughout the tour. But we'll watch this quick video to start.
Welcome to the fermenter room here at Buffalo Trace, where we've been distilling for 200 years. We've got a building full of 93,000 gallon fermenters, where you can see and smell fermentation underway. We continue to honor our legacy and embrace change through technology, which certainly helps us meet the demand for our listeners. We have invested in expanding all parts of our operation while preserving our quality and the processes we've used for decades. The expansion work has been slow and steady since the late 1990s. However, in 2018, we stepped it up due to the demand. First, we invested in our motor run, then we increased our cooking capacity. Then we added our new fermenters by raising the roof on this historic structure. Now let's talk fermentation. For each different mash bill, we mix grains with water and cook them up to release the sugars. After that, we transfer the mash to the fermenting tanks, and it takes 4 of our cookers to fill 1 of these fermenters. Next, we add yeast, using the same strains of yeast we've been using since prohibition. And this is where the magic happens. The patient will wait 3 to 5 days for the yeast to convert the sugars to alcohol. This tiny organism, yeast, plays such a mighty role in the success of our operation here at Buffalo Trace. Once fermentation is complete, we transfer the liquid to the beer well to await distillation. Fermentation takes its own sweet time, so we're patient, appreciating the traditions of our distillery, and knowing the best things in life just can't be rushed.
All right. So what we're going to do now, we're going to head down the stairs. And again, we're going to start at the very beginning of the process. We're going to head back to grain receiving. You don't really realize standing up there how big these tanks actually are until you're up right next to one and looking up at it. And you can actually, if you come up to it and you put your hand on it, the tanks are warm. So that is another naturally occurring effect of fermentation. So when we cook all that sweet mash, we actually cool it down to 75 degrees before we put it into the tank. But then as it's fermenting, it can get up to about 100, 101 degrees. And again, that's just from the yeast being active. So it'll start off cool and then it'll work its way up. But we're gonna head down this way.
Smells like a farm.
Yeah. Yeah, so smells like that because this is grain receiving. Now it is Labor Day, so they aren't currently running production back here. But if you actually come back this way, since there aren't any trucks coming in, what they typically will do, they'll come in, they'll back down this alley here, and the truck will start releasing grains over this receptacle. So before they can just start releasing those grains, they actually have to be tested. We test for mold and we test for moisture. With our corn, we like it to fall between 6 and 14% moisture level. And that's because if it's under 6%, it's too dry. We're gonna run it through our system. We're gonna get a lot of grain dust, which you don't want. And if it's over that 14%, then it's gonna gunk up our system. So we like to fall between that 6 and 14%. The corn that we receive, it's your typical non-GMO yellow dent number 2 corn. It's your typical filled corn. When we are running production, we receive about 1.5 million pounds of corn every day that we run production, which is about 25 truckloads of just corn, not to include the malted barley and the rye and the wheat. But again, they back in, they drop it off into this receptacle, and then an auger system picks it up, feeds it into the silos. And then once we're ready to start up, the silos, again, an auger system will pick up those grains and it'll feed it into the hammer mill. And the hammer mill is exactly how you would think that it operates. It's a rotating series of blades that are going to take those grains and basically make a corn meal consistency that we can cook. And then an auger system, again, is going to pick it up. It'll feed it into these big scale bins, which are basically like big measuring cups that feed into our cookers. And then we cook. Now we're going to walk up what we call the mash house, which is where the cookers sit. And we'll start talking about that. So, again, this is what we call the mash house. So all those ground up grains, again, there's scale bins right above the cookers that are going to feed in those grains. And the way that we cook under pressure. They're basically like big crock pots. We vacuum seal these cookers so we can increase the boiling point. So typically the boiling point, right, is 212 degrees. We actually bump it up to 240 degrees. We're cooking under 15 PSI. If there's any engineers here. Any engineers? Chemists? No? Oh, okay. All right. Then I'm watching you. If I say something wrong, just... So typically what we do is we'll cook the corn by itself first. The first 45 minutes we'll just throw in the corn, unless it's a wheated bourbon. If it's a wheated bourbon, then we go ahead and throw in the wheat with the corn. And that first 45 minutes, again, we're cooking at about 240 degrees. We vacuum seal it. Now, when you came in, you might have seen a plaque, and it had one of the original tops to Blanton's cookers, which we were operating out of up until 2019. He had 3 10,000-gallon cookers from the 30s that we were using until we started expanding. And now, whether there's any accuracy to this or not, but I was told they drug out the old cookers from that big garage door that we came up beside. And to get in these new cookers, they had to bring in a sky crane lift operator. And off of a barge system on the Kentucky River, they had to lift and drop these in. Basically the same way that we did the fermenters. They had to cut out the roof of this building and drop them in from the barge system. So they got this first one in, they got the second one in, they got the third one in, they got them put together. Then you got to drop in the fourth one. That's told it's basically like putting thread through a needle, right? You get down to that last one, you got a very limited space, very limited amount of room for error. If the wind were to shift, if you were to bump into anything, you're basically going to have to start from scratch what you just put together. So they actually had to bring in a second sky crane lift operator to get the last cooker into this building. So these are our main ones. So again, that first 45 minutes is just the corn by itself, or the corn and wheat if it's a wheated bourbon. And then back behind here, you have the small grain cookers. And that's where we cook the rye and the malted barley separately. We start those off at lower temperatures. So the malted barley, we're cooking at about 86 degrees, and the rye, we're cooking at 156 degrees. So that first 45 minutes, that's what they're doing. And then afterwards, we start dropping the temperature down in these big cookers. We release that pressure, temperature goes down. At about 160, we throw in the rye. At about 150, we throw in the malted barley. And then for another 45 minutes, they're going to cook all together. And after that cooking process, that's what we call a sweet mash. So sweet mash, that's what we're going to cool down and put into the fermentation tank to ferment. So we're going to head back up this way. And I've been told that the reason we cook under pressure is that it's because it makes it a faster and cleaner cook. And the way that I've had it described to me is, you know how you make oatmeal or like cream of wheat at home? You add in the water, right, and you let it cook, and it's going to start to gel up. And if you leave it on the stove too long, it's going to burn up. So the reason we cook under pressure is because when we can increase that boiling point, we can bypass that gelatinization phase and just keep it a liquid, that soluble sugar that we want, that consistency, and it doesn't burn up the cook when we cook under pressure. So again, we cook total altogether, it's about 90 minutes for one cook, and one cook fills one fermentation tank. So when we're done cooking it, we actually have a mash cooler. You see this series of pipes above that building there? That mash cooler is it's a 3-tier vacuum system. And it's going to cool down that mash to that 75 degrees that we want to throw it into the fermentation tank. And the reason why they added that as part of our expansion is because we can dump those cookers a lot faster and get them into a fermentation tank a lot faster and start up that process. So that's the next stop, fermentation. We're going to take a deep dive into that. As we walk down here too, you'll notice some pictures that were dated from 1936, back when we were known as the George T. Stagg Distillery. That's the original fermentation room, and this is the mash house, and this is where we're standing right now. And as you come in, you'll see this no swimming sign. So that no swimming sign is quite literal. If anybody were to decide to jump into one of these fermentation tanks, you're going to sink straight to the bottom. So during that fermentation process, again, remember that bubbling effect that you saw from the yeast? There's no surface tension. So there's no way of paddling your way back up. Even if you were able to make it back up to the top, there's so much carbon dioxide being produced as well. In a matter of seconds, you would be knocked out. So it is quite literal, no swimming. We had a guy jump in a few years back. Obviously, we couldn't get him out. We had to wait until we were distilling, and it came out a full body bourbon. Come on, you gotta crack a smile at that. That was pretty good. But anyways, as we walk along the fermenters, if you have any loose items, please hold on to them tight, because if they do fall in, there's no way of retrieving them. That goes for cell phones, anything. So just hold on to those, and we'll take a walk back here. So these are the original fermentation tanks from Blanton's time here on property. These were built in 1936. They hold 92,000 gallons each. Again, we start off with that sweet mash. So when we're done cooking, we have, again, 4 20,000 gallon cookers. So after the cooking process, we have we actually get a little bit less. It's about 75,000 gallons of sweet mash. So we'll throw in the sweet mash, and then we throw in about 10,000 gallons of sour mash. And sour mash is previously fermented and distilled mash. Think of it like starter for bread. It's the same exact thing. It carries over a little bit of tasting consistency, but it's also what the sour mash does is it helps the environment for the yeast. It carries a nice pH balance for the yeast to thrive in. So we'll throw in that sour mash, and then we throw in 66 pounds of yeast. And that yeast, it's kind of like a bell curve, the fermentation process is. When you throw that yeast in at the very beginning of that curve, so it's going to slowly work its way up. It's going to wake up, it's going to start eating through that sugar, and then it's going to start producing. It's going to start producing alcohol. It populates more yeast. And at a certain point, it'll create so much alcohol in that environment. Alcohol is toxic to yeast. It'll start killing off the yeast. So at the peak, which we see typically is about 3 to 5 days in. 3 to 5 days in, you've hit the peak of fermentation. And then it starts to trail off. That yeast starts to naturally die off, and it'll go still at the top. So it's still bubbling right now, but eventually that bubbling will stop. Sometimes a crust will form over, and that's how we know it's done. We ferment for 3 to 5 days. We could ferment longer if we wanted to. You can go a little bit longer. But for us, again, we know that that peak is about 3 to 5 days in. We're going to get about 6 to 8% alcohol content out of there. That's what we call distiller's beer. We could get a higher percentage of alcohol out of it if we waited and let it ferment longer. But it takes a lot longer to build up because, again, that yeast is dying off. So they're not going to be producing as much alcohol as they were in that first 3 to 5 days. So we rather just go ahead and distill it and start up the next batch and get it going than wait a little bit longer just to get a little bit of extra alcohol out of it. again, what we call distiller's beer. That is what we are going to take over to the column still and throw into the beer still, and we'll talk about that at our next stop. Okay? Are there any questions so far? Yeah.
What changes between, say, your small batch Buffalo Trace versus like a 12-year?
So small batch is relative to what you produce. So there's no regulations on small batch. Like a batch bourbon, it can be up to 1,000 different barrels mixed and married together. You might go down the road to a smaller distillery, and their small batch might be 2 barrels. It's just any number over 1. For us, our small batch is 250 barrels. But again, just relative to what you produce. Where we fill 2,000 barrels, give or take, Monday through Friday, a small batch, 250 barrels, that's a small batch for us. Versus, you said small batch versus
12-year.
So it's just a difference in batch is just the number, the scale of what you're producing, and then time and placement is its whole other thing. So we'll get into that a little bit later in the tour as well. Any other questions? No? You guys are quiet. You guys had enough coffee or no? We sell coffee in the gift shop now. Not enough bourbon? Yeah.
So why do they call it beer instead of something else in the process? And why steel over wood when, I mean, different distilleries used to use wood, now they use steel. What's the difference and why?
That is a good question. Those are 2 really good questions that I'm not exactly sure. I know that they call it, it's just called distiller's beer. I'm not sure how that term came about. But again, it falls between that 6 to 8% alcohol content. It's not beer that you would think of like that beer. It's still, obviously, it's got chunks in it. It's very sour. And then we call it the beer still because that's obviously what we're feeding into it. But again, I'm not sure how distiller's beer was originated, why it's called that. And then we use still simply because these were the fermenters from Blanchard's time. Before then, Taylor was known as using copper fermenters. He used copper fermenters back in his day because he had studied abroad in Europe and noticed that they were using copper piping. So he just kind of expanded on that idea. And we still have one of his original fermenters in the back of the distillery that we used to do some experimental bourbons and such. But nowadays we still, I think our new still house, it's still, but it still has copper infused in it. It's just what we use as preference, what we feel works best for us, what carries our tasting profiles that we follow versus, other distilleries, like you said, they might use wood. I'm not sure that brings out any more flavor or if it's just preference and for affordability of it. But that's a good question that I would have to research into.
All right.
Any other questions?
Nope.
All right. We're going to head up the stairs here. So this used to be our yeast propagation room. You can see that they are labeled yeast tubs. We used to try to propagate our own yeast, but we weren't very good at it. We ended up outsourcing that to another company, so we don't have to worry about it. We get it in dry form. So they ended up taking 2 of the yeast propagation tanks and converted them into fermenters/cookers. And this is where we do some of our experimental bourbons and where we do a couple of our vodkas. So what typically will happen is, let's start with experimental bourbons. He'll typically have a set of grains over here that he will dump in. He'll cook it, he'll ferment it the same way that it works in our other fermenters. And by the time he gets in tomorrow, he'll probably distill this. It's ready to go. It's not bubbling very much. Again, it's still at the top. It was bubbling earlier this weekend. So this is ready. This over here, this is our hybrid still. We also call it the micro still. It is our experimental still. So it's a pot still, column still combined. And what he'll do, he'll take all that mash, pump it over here, and steam heat is going to cause the alcohol to evaporate off the mash. So it'll evaporate, and it'll go into a condenser, which is that horizontal copper tube that you see up there. So that condenser, it's basically a pipe within a pipe. It has water that circulates on the outer circle of it. So it's going to cause that alcohol to recondense back into liquid form. And off that first run of bourbon, that is what we call low wine. Low wine. So it still has, when you talk about distilling, you have the heads, you have the tails, and then you have the hearts. The heart is the alcohol. Those heads and tails are byproducts off of distilling, and you don't want that mixed in with your alcohol. It's not good for you to consume. We have to distill it a second time. So that second distillation is going to clean it up, and it's also going to help fine tune it for us. Because off that first run, we're typically getting it off at about 120 proof. For our bourbons, well, he's experimenting, so he could be doing it at different proofs, but also off of that second distillation, he's able to fine tune it to a specific proof that he's wanting to get it to. So he'll do a second run through of it, and that is experimental bourbons. Again, we do it at a small scale because we don't want to take up one of our main fermentation tanks for something that may or may not work. We don't want to do it at a big scale and then have a bunch of product that we can't use. So we do it at a small scale to start. But the unfortunate thing about it too is that say we do this, it fills 12 barrels for us, we stick them into different warehouses, we see how it comes along, and then we end up making this great product. The unfortunate thing is well, it took us 10 years to do that experiment. It's going to take us another 10 years to do it at a larger scale. That is the unfortunate thing. But again, we're constantly in search for that next best bourbon, so we do experiment a lot. We have 2.3 million barrels here on site, and about 30,000 of our barrels at any given time are experimental barrels, constantly in search for that next best bourbon. So that is for bourbon. Now he also does a couple different vodkas up here. We do the wheat grains for the Wheatley vodka up here. So Wheatley vodka, it's made with wheat grains and another proprietary set of grains. We just do the wheat grains up here. So he'll cook it, he'll ferment it, and then he'll distill it. But with the vodka, it runs a little bit differently. So he'll do that first cut, and then after that he has the vodka still. And that's where he's going to put the alcohol in. And the vodka still is different from a column still. Instead of plates along the inside, it has overlapping bars, and that creates surface area. So as that alcohol vapor formulates, it's going to come into contact with those bars, and it's going to recondense. And it causes what we call reflux. So it's going to bounce up and down, it's going to evaporate, go back into liquid form, drop down again, re-evaporate. And so he'll do that run through. For Wheatley vodka, he'll do that run through 7 times. And then he'll send it over. It'll be mixed in with the other proprietary set of grains that have also been distilled 7 times. And then they distill it all together 3 more times and triple filter it. That's Wheatley vodka. But he also makes another vodka up here called Clix vodka, C-L-I-X, which stands for the Roman numerals 159. And that is not the proof on the vodka. That is how many times that vodka is distilled. 159 times through. It takes him 4 months to make that vodka. They do it once a year. It goes for $300 in the gift shop. Comes in a nice decanter in a wooden box. I've had a chance to sample some of it before, just a little bit. And it's like warm water. It goes down like butter. Because the more times you distill it, the cleaner the alcohol gets. So you're removing more and more and more, making it pure alcohol. And at a certain point, again, your goal with vodka is to make a neutral grain spirit, odorless and tasteless. Do that 159 times through it, and it does not taste like alcohol. There's no burn. There's nothing to it other than just, it tastes like butter. And it's 80 proof, very dangerous. So that is the vodka side of things. So again, this is just our micro still. We're gonna head off towards the main still house here in just a second. We're gonna head up here. Probably gonna go on heavy breathing on the. Yeah, it is warm. It's very warm. That's about probably another 100, 200 degrees. So I just wanted to stop right here because when you make this turn, there's another 4 steps immediately down, okay? You guys can come down this way if you want. So this still house that we're standing in right now, the building itself was built in 1936. Again, you can see some photos of it on that wall over there of when it was originally built. The still in behind me here, this was reconstructed in the 50s. And it kind of operates the same way that we were talking about the micro still, right? We take all that fermented mash, all that distiller's beer, it goes out to a beer well outside, right in behind here, and that beer well feeds into the top of the column still here. That mash goes in, it works its way down. As it's working its way down, there are 13 plates inside. The 13 plates have tiny little perforated holes, so as that mash gets separated out, at the bottom of the still, there's extreme steam heat. It's about 200 degrees steam heat that's going to start rising up from the bottom. And when this still is going, it almost looks like it's boiling inside there. All that mash is running through. And all we're doing off of this first run is we are taking the alcohol off the mash. We are extracting that alcohol out. So at a certain pinpoint, they know where they can pull the alcohol off. So they're going to start taking all that alcohol vapor and then they run it through a condenser. And off that first one, the first run is what we call low wine. Again, low wine, it still has some impurities to it. It's about 120 proof when we do that first run. And then we're going to distill it again through a doubler, which is a big pot still. And we'll run into the new pot still when we head downstairs, but that's just going to help us fine tune it, clean it up, and off that second run is what's called high wine. It's also called moonshine, distillate, unaged whiskey, whatever you want to call it. That's what we're going to proof down to put into the barrel to age. Okay? So again, we can't distill higher than 160 proof. That's one of the rules to bourbon. We actually distill our product between 130 proof to 140 proof, depending on what recipe it is. For our mash bill number 1, which makes your Buffalo Trace, your Benchmark, your Charter Oak, your E.H. Taylor, your George T. Stagg, your Eagle Rare. We distill that at 140. For our mash bill number 2, that makes your Blantons, your Rock Hill Farms, your Hancock's Reserve, your Ancient Age, and your Elmer T Lee. We distill that at 135 proof. And then for our wheated mash bill, the Weller mash bill, we distill that one at 130 even. So when we get done distilling, when it goes off to be put into the barrel, we still have to proof it down because barrel entry cannot be higher than 125 proof. For our 2 rye bourbons, they go in at 125 in that barrel. We proof it to 125. But for the wheated bourbons, we proof those down to 114 to start in the barrel. We do that for our wheated bourbons because they say it's better to start them off at a lower proof. They just come out with better tasting profiles later. So, all right. Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna head into the new still house. This new still was put in 2022 as part of our expansion. It is identical to the old still. I mean, it looks a little bit different on the outside, obviously, but down to the placement of the plates inside this still, it is identical to the old. They didn't want to mess with the quality of the product, so again, it is identical. We have the biggest in the industry. They are 40 foot tall, 7 foot diameter. And they each have the capacity to output 60,000 gallons in a day. Back behind you here, this is the beer well that I was referring to. So that's where all the fermented mash goes once we're done fermenting. A lot of people ask, you know, it's basically a pot sitting outside. There's no cover on top. What do you do about birds? You know, they fly overhead. They might have some digestive issues. What do you do about rain or snow? We asked our master distiller the same question. Harlan Wheatley, he said, for one, we have it uncovered because we've always had it uncovered. That's just how it was. That's how we've operated. For two, we're working with gravity. That drains from the bottom, and it helps us basically get the mash up to the top of the column still here. So if we were to put a top on it, we would lose I'm losing words. We would lose that advantage. And if we were to add any covering to it, it also might just attract more birds in the long run, might create more problems in the long run. So if a bird happens to fall in or anything like that, we just call it eagle rare. All right, I'm gonna try to crack my jokes, guys. You gotta laugh at them, all right? They're gonna happen either way, okay? So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna head down the stairs, okay? I have somebody's hair clip. If anybody dropped their hair clip. Did anybody drop their hair clip? Yeah. Sorry. I'll get out of the way. So these are the spirit safes. They're just like the ones that we saw at the old still house. Again, you have your low wine. That's the first run. And I cracked that joke about the distiller's beer coming in. Again, we were just extracting the alcohol off that mash. That is all we're doing off that first run. So if anything goes in, it's going to be extracted out. We're just pulling the alcohol off that mash for our product. So that is the first run. The high wine is the second run, and that goes through the doubler, which is in behind you here. That is the big pot still that's going to fine tune that alcohol for us. And you'll notice if you go to any other distilleries, and you'll notice on a lot of our production equipment, you'll see Vendome Copper and Brass Works, which is based out of Louisville, Kentucky. That is the biggest brass works company in the United States. They've been operating since the 1950s. They are a big component in our expansion process, and you'll even see it in some of our older equipment pieces too. Just a shout out to Louisville, Kentucky right there. But anyways, does anybody want their picture taken in front of the spirit safes before we head out of here? Yeah, so we're going to backtrack a little bit, actually. We still have another stop to make on this tour. We're going to head off to something that is kind of like an asterisk that we do here. So we don't just make bourbon here, we also make a byproduct. When you are done distilling, at the bottom of that column still, all that mash that you have pushed through, it creates a byproduct. At the bottom of the still, you have two separate piles. You have your thick and your thin. The thin is the sour mash. That's what we're going to hold on to, and we'll use that to start up the next run, the next time we do that mash bill. And then we have the thick, which is basically like slop. Right, we're using a lot of grains. There's still a lot of proteins, a lot of nutrients still in that mash, even after we're done distilling it. So we're going to take that slop, and we're going to create another product called DDG, which is dry distiller's grain. And we sell that off to farmers for feed. And I've actually been told that it makes enough money for us to buy the grains that we receive. So we're making a byproduct while also making our product and making enough. I know. I make you nervous. It's okay.
Yeah, you respected that.
I go slow. 3 years experience. I've learned my lesson a couple times along the way. But so we're making our product, and we're making a byproduct off of it that is making us enough money to pay for the grains that we need for our product. It works out for us. I almost have more difficulty walking forward than I do backwards. But what we're passing right now, this is not another grain receiving. This is one of our dry houses. It was built in the 1950s. And again, what we're doing, we're taking all that slop, and it goes into these big tanks that you see sitting here over this on the side. Each of those tanks is 100,000 gallon capacity tanks. Again, we're distilling a lot, so we're making a lot of that byproduct as well. And the basic run through is they'll take the slop, they'll run it through a centrifuge, it's going to spin it around. Any liquid that's sitting in there is going to fling towards the outer part. They're going to take that liquid, they'll run it through an evaporator. The evaporator is going to turn it into basically like a syrupy form. And then what we call wet cake is going to be run through a steam dryer, which works just like your dryer at home. It dries it up, and then we're going to reintroduce that syrup back into that, and that's what's creating your DDG. We're not going to head into this one, but we're going to head into our brand new dry house that we built as part of our expansion. It cost them about $58 million to create that new one. But out of this old one from the 50s, it takes us about an hour, sometimes more, to fill up a truckload. Versus this one, if it's running properly, we can fill up a truckload in about 20 minutes. So it kind of quickens that a little bit for us. And that used to be one of Taylor's original warehouses from the 1800s. Again, we're a National Historic Landmark. We can't just tear down buildings. So they had to reconstruct the whole inside of the building. We're actually going to head this way, guys. You'll notice on the side of this building here, there's plaques with dates and with numbers in beside. those dates. So these are flood lines. Again, we sit right on the Kentucky River. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when we are going to see a big flood. We actually just had one back in April. So the top plaque here that you see was the flood from 1978. The river crested at 48.5 feet. The flood that we just experienced back in April is that little black mark that you see right below that plaque. It crested at 47.5 feet. Most of our the distillery that is down on these lower parts, just about from here, the back of the distillery, all the way to where you guys parked to get into the visitor center, was flooded at differing levels. The gift shop had about 3 feet of water in it. The place that you got your wristbands, it was about 12 feet of water. You could just barely see the top of that building poking out of the water. So, speaking of the river, we're going to head back this way, and you'll actually get to take a look at the river. So again, this is the Kentucky River right here. And the Kentucky River is one of the only few on this side of the country that flows north. It feeds into the Ohio River, and the Ohio River feeds into the Mississippi River. We got this great 90-degree turn in the river right here, which is said where it would shallow out and where the buffalo would pass through and leave trails behind for those early explorers. So you got to think, those flood lines, that water was all the way up here above our heads.
So how much waste is generated in a flood like that?
That I don't know. We haven't lost any barrels yet. They have to go through testing. We have to keep an eye on them. But as far as I know, we have not discarded any of our product. You got to think those barrels, obviously, if they're sealed well enough to withhold the product in there, it's sealed tight enough that it shouldn't have gotten into them.
How are you guys recovering from that flood? Are you guys just waiting, and then I imagine you guys have to shut a lot of things down.
Yeah, we cleaned up pretty quick though. We had contractors working here 24/7 to get us back up and running. Within that first week, they already had some of the production back up and running. Like Blanton's Bottling Hall was one of the first to open back up and get going again. I think it might have been a week after the flood. Like once it receded, they were back in there. They were cleaning stuff up. They were getting going again. The longest thing that took is the warehouses. They had to put all the barrels back into the rick systems. They had to clean the outer part of the buildings and spray everything down. So that's what took the longest, really. Yeah. Yeah, all the warehouses were closed off. They were locked up, so we didn't lose any barrels to the river, but we did have to put them back into the ricks because obviously they had come out of the ricks. Some of them had. All right, we're gonna come back this way. Remember I had mentioned at the very beginning of the tour that we just recently added on an additional 8 fermenters. Those are those tanks sitting right out there next to the warehouse. So they're outdoor fermenters. And they have a different system on the inside. They have a coil system on the inside that has the ability to heat up and cool down. So during the summer months we can keep it cool in there and keep the yeast alive and going. And during the winter months, we can keep it warm enough in there to do the same thing. To keep it fermenting, to keep it going. Yeah. Yep. And we'll see it on the back of this warehouse too when we head back there. So again, this building, this is a warehouse from the 1800s that they took. They tore up the inside of it. They took out all those ricks and they reconstructed it into a state-of-the-art dry house. Again, about $58 million worth went into making this, and we're going to take just a quick little peek inside. So if you ever come onto the property and you almost smell this sweet brownie smell, this is actually where it's coming from. It's from the DDG. Now, if you ever come on and you smell almost like for me, it almost smells like you're cooking pasta over the stove, or you might just smell, it smells like corn. That is coming from the cooking, fermenting, and a milling process. But this is really the sweet smell on the distillery. So again, we're taking that spent beer, the beer that has already been distilled. We have the alcohol off of it, and at the bottom again, it's just that slop material from the mash. We're going to take that, run them through a centrifuge. There's 2 centrifuges in the back of this room, and again, it's going to spin it around. It's going to cause that liquid to fling to the outer parts. They're going to take that liquid, run it through the evaporators, and that evaporator is going to transform it into a syrupy form. And then these 2 big steam dryers that you see here, they work just like your dryers at home. Each one of those cylinders inside the steam dryer is a pipe that extends out, and it has steam heat running through it. It's going to take that wet cake, it literally calls it wet cake, and it's going to go through the steam dryer until it reaches the end, until it's dried to a certain moisture level that they want, and then they're going to reintroduce that syrup back into the product. They have a syrup tank, and then that syrup line, it goes out, and basically at the end we're feeding it into the trucks to the farmers to take. It's good for obviously cattle, but I've even been told, I have a friend that works at K-State for their aquaculture program. They have aquaponic systems, and sometimes they will even use it to feed fish. So there's a lot of good use to it. And we'll take a look a little bit closer at what the product actually looks like. I don't want to make a mess because they just cleaned up the dry house this morning. He sprayed it down. But this is what it looks like. This is DDG. Again, you have corn, you have rye, you have malted barley, you have wheat. There's still a lot of good nutrients in there for farm animals. Yeah, you can.
Look at how you do.
I've had people eat it. I've tried it before, I'm not gonna lie. It definitely does not taste as sweet as it smells. It's got a lot of, it still has like a salty sodium taste to it, but yeah, that's it. And this pays for all the grains that we receive and a lot of salaries here at Buffalo Trace. So it's a good business layout, again, a good business plan. And they're even extending onto this. I think they have announced it, but they're going to be having a company here in Frankfurt that is going to help in this process of making this product. It's going to bring a lot of jobs here to Frankfurt, so pretty cool. All right. And we make piles of this. If you can't step inside, but if you just look through this door, you'll see piles of this stuff. All right. So now we're gonna head back out the same way that we came in. All right. So guys, we've walked through the entire process from grain receiving down to that unaged whiskey that goes into the barrel. Now we'll talk a little bit about aging. Unfortunately, this tour does not include an aging warehouse, but we're going to take a look at a special warehouse. We're going to take a walk up the hill. No, not Warehouse X, but you can walk up to that one. Yeah. If you go through the garden area, you can walk up to it by yourself. It's kind of, you have to walk uphill. It's far into the garden area, but you'll find it. Yep. So you can see where they had to pressure wash the outside of the building. You can see it on this warehouse too up here, a little bit better. So that is a whiskey fungus. It's just attracted to the alcohol that's being produced in the area. It just kind of sticks to the trees and the buildings around it. It's not harmful to the trees, but it does, does stick to them. So this is Warehouse V. Warehouse V was built in 1952. It was one of the last contributions that Blanton made to the property before retiring. Its sole purpose is to age every millionth barrel after the Prohibition. They actually didn't start with the first one, though. The first one came along in 1943. And they started with the second millionth barrel, which came along in 1953. So 1953 to 1961 was when we hit the third. 61 to 71. 71 is when we hit the fourth. And then 1984 was when we hit the fifth millionth barrel. And again, during the 80s and 90s, no one was really drinking bourbon. They had switched over to other spirits. We hit a big bourbon slowdown in the 80s and 90s. We didn't hit the next millionth barrel until 2008. That's when we hit the 6 millionth barrel. So there was a big gap there. And then we picked right back up. 2018 is when we hit the 7 millionth barrel. And then 2018 to 2022 is when we hit the 8 millionth barrel that's sitting in there now. We shortened that. We were increasing production because we hit this big bourbon boom. Everybody was demanding for this product, so we started increasing production. And then just a few weeks ago, we just hit the 9 millionth barrel. So 2022 to 2025. We were going from just about every 10 years, that one big gap, to shortening it down to 4 years and then 3 years. So we're either going to need a lot more of these buildings, or they're going to need to figure something else out, because the 7 millionth barrel is still aging in another warehouse. They had to pull that out early, set it in another warehouse to continue aging, and they'll probably have to do the same for this one. Because again, it's only been aging for 3 years. It needs more time. And what they did with that 6 millionth barrel, they had bottled that up. They put it in nice display cases and they auctioned it off to charity, and Sazerac raised over $1 million for charity. I'd say that's most likely what they'll end up doing with the 7 millionth barrel and this one once they're done aging. We'll see. But they're going to have a whole ceremony where they'll have this whole street lined with people. They'll have newscasters come in, and then Harlan Wheatley and Freddie Johnson will come in. They'll roll in the barrel and do a ceremony of putting it into this warehouse. Pretty cool. All right. This month, sometime in September, yeah. Yep. Just here. Mm-hmm. Yep, they still use them to roll the barrels. So if you ever see a barrel rolling off on its own, don't freak out. It's just following its path. It's all good.
They have a particular day they do Fireball.
No, not that I know of. No.
We looked at one time. Smelled the cinnamon egg.
Yeah. I don't know that that's, I don't know. Yep, and we're back. And now if you guys will have those QR codes facing up on your wristband, that's part of the band that we're going to scan to get you into the tasting room. So we talked about it down at Warehouse V. These are the previous millionth barrel heads. You got 1942, that was the first millionth barrel. 42, so I was off by one. 42 to 53, 53 to 61, 61 to 71, 71 to 81, 81 to 2008, 2018, 2022, and eventually there will be a 2025 put up here on this wall. That's the count that we're sitting at right now. All right, so again, we're gonna head to the tasting room, have that QR code facing up on your wristband. Guys, as you guys can see in front of you, we have a few of our bourbons and a rye whiskey. We're gonna kind of jump around on this tasting a little bit. What was your favorite? Elmer?
Root beer.
Root beer? Well, guys, thank you guys for coming out to Buffalo Trace. Come out and see us again. Come back, do another tour. Every time you do a tour, it could be different with another tour guide. So even if you're taking the same tour, do it again. It'll be different next time. If you want to take those cups, you are more than welcome to. Same for the mats if you want to take those. If not, we'll throw them away for you. Couple more things. There's still more to do even though you're done with your tour. They have cocktails for sale up here on the second floor if you want a cocktail. They also have bourbon cream and root beer to sample in the gift shop if you want to sample that. There's a garden area you can walk through by yourselves without a tour guide. And again, guys, you got the gift shop. Go load up on some good bourbon. All right. Thank you guys again.